It's so natural for a person to retort to anger. And so that's exactly where she goes. And it's there, it's always been there. It's what's driven her throughout everything. Here comes that familiar feeling of anger, and she doesn't do anything to choke that. She lives in it. It's this feeling that you could call Targaryen craziness, you could give it all of these names that it doesn't deserve, because it is just grief. It's hurt. And she has this ability to make that hurt a little bit less just for a minute. And here she is sitting on this ridge, and there's the emotion, and there's the feeling, and the feeling is to fucking kill her. Sorry. When you feel that much, when you feel that much failure and disappointment and shame and hurt and lost love, there's only so much pain you can handle before you snap.
So after spending over half a decade away from the MCU, I watched WandaVision, and now that it is finished, boy do I have some feelings. Mostly witchy feelings about fellow witches, feelings about motherhood and mourning, weeping women, and overwhelming grief. WandaVision was the catharsis I didn't expect but wholly needed, delivered by a studio that I had long given up on being capable of creating stories about women that mattered. Let's talk about it. Hello. My name is Mage, and welcome to Black and White Thinking. Before I talk about the show itself, I'm just going to rant for a moment about how I got here, because my history with the MCU definitely shaped my expectations for the show. So I've always been a comic fan. My family and I have always bonded over graphic novels, comics, superheroes, fantasy gods and monsters, etc. And as a kid, I was never particularly Team Marvel or Team DC, but was both into Batman and more obsessively anything Gotham-verse, whilst also nursing an obsession with the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and my first boyfriend Peter Parker. I've always been immersed in this kind of stuff. I've read comics, I've watched adaptations, and over the years it has cemented some very particular ideas in my brain for how I enjoy seeing these characters and their universe portrayed. I'm basically still into all of these things, but with Marvel as an adult, I have felt kind of detached from a lot of the portrayals of my favourite characters. The Avengers are fine, I guess, but the detachment of the X-Men, Fantastic Four and Spider-Man from the overall MCU had a big impact on how I enjoyed it when it started, which wasn't much. I also have been trying to cancel Whedon for years, so no thanks. I could sit here and list all of the reasons I don't care about the MCU and all the reasons I've still not seen half the movies or whatever, but I'm not gonna. My point mentioning all of this is not that I don't love the MCU, but that I have no base knowledge for any of the specific recent goings on in this on-screen universe. The last film I saw in the cinema was Ultron, which is relevant to this video given that it was Wanda and Vision's first appearance. I saw Civil War and also Ragnarok, but not a lot else. My point is, I haven't fucked with this stuff for a while, so going into WandaVision, whilst I knew who Wanda, Vision, Agatha, Monica were because of colloquial comic knowledge, I haven't actually spent much time within the MCU since Pietro was originally shredded. But like I said, I love the X-Men, and I would give my life for Eric Lenscher and his entire dynasty. One of the reasons I didn't care to catch up on the MCU was because I knew, and I know, that Wanda was treated pretty terribly. Also, the non-mutant thing just kind of messes with my head a bit. My expectations going into WandaVision were low, and they were mostly that 1, it would kill some time in lockdown, and 2, that there would be an introduction of some kind through Wanda into a newly restyled X-verse, now that Disney had the rights to the X-Men. My expectations for character development, arcs, and insight were minimal. I've never felt much like the Avengers were even friends, and I know that's unpopular. But a lot of the relationships and characters in the MCU have fallen flat with me in the past. I assumed here that Wanda would simply be a vessel for moving into Mephisto and Patrick Stewart territory. I've been done waiting for powerful women to be written with respect on TV for a long time. I will tell you all about this in a while. I've had my heart broken and I won't be fooled again. So that being the case, I embraced the show as a plot puzzle that would lead to the X-Men. Very little else. So I totally get this mood, this feeling, the idea that the plot was maybe less complicated than people had expected. However, WandaVision was still better than I could have ever imagined in ways I never quite expected, putting women's grief before the needs of the fans who think they own her pain. And that grief is why I'm here, and it's what I want to talk about. A woman's grief is always a juicy narrative to tell. It's a story that has been used and abused by writers for quite literally thousands of years, and more often than not, the portrayal of such grief is left wanting. Now, I'm the sad kind of girl that did not take the end of Game of Thrones well, at all. I'm still very much in mourning after dedicating over a damn decade of my life to A Song of Ice and Fire, and more specifically Daenerys Targaryen. I mean, I'm so angry I wrote a book about it. Maybe I'll actually publish it one day. This video absolutely could be a 2-hour-long video essay, but I can't right now. My thoughts here aren't particularly organised, they're scattered at best. And yeah, you all know where this is going. I'm truly and honestly blown away by the simple concept that WandaVision managed to achieve something in 9 episodes that Game of Thrones couldn't in 8 seasons, and with over $1 billion. But mostly, I'm just annoyed. Not to be dramatic, but the breakup I had with George Martin was the worst one of my life. There was something truly refreshing in WandaVision, something often missing from all superhero or fantasy-based stories, which is the focus on character. Depth of character being what Game of Thrones was ironically praised for in the beginning and fell flat on its face trying to deliver. And as I mentioned, I have long since given up on expecting this kind of quality from either Disney or Marvel. You guys do not want to hear my opinions on Disney's Star Wars. Wanda's trauma was handled with a nuance and understanding that I have not seen in a long time on television, offering a true catharsis for all the shit I had to watch happen to other strong, witchy women with more power than God. Daenerys and Wanda are deeply comparable, and I don't think it's hard to see that. They are children of loss and war, orphaned young and left with only a brother who would die like their parents. They are told they are vessels of destruction by men that start wars. They both eventually lose the one person they find love and family with after their blood family is taken from them. Their main differences lie, in my opinion, and at least thematically, in how such power, and more importantly how the trauma of such a powerful woman is handled. How she handles this trauma within herself, how the people around her handle this trauma, and more importantly, how this trauma is handled by the writer who has the privilege of telling her story. When Game of Thrones ended, no one was seemingly more upset about how Daenerys' storyline ended than Emilia Clarke. I mean, she almost died giving this performance, and ultimately for what? And she didn't really keep this a secret. Sometimes she just went full troll.
Have you shot your final scenes yet, and are you happy with how things ended? Yes. She didn't say yes. You didn't say yes.
Best season ever!
There was a little backlash on the last season. There's some critique.
Yeah.
What did that feel like?
Well, you know what? It was profoundly flattering, is what it was. Yes.
When you read that final script,
Yeah.
what happens to Daenerys?
Yeah.
What was your reaction?
It's sort of almost impossible to answer that question.
Without giving something away?
I have so much to say about that.
And other times she was more honest in expressing why she didn't agree with what was happening within the show. One quote from a post-show interview she gave has always kind of stuck with me. I played it at the beginning.
It's this feeling that you could call Targaryen craziness, you could give it all of these names that it doesn't deserve, because it is just grief.
One of the reasons this quote sticks with me is that it also reminds me of a quote from another show of this ilk, Black Sails.
How would you feel if the one man you thought would never betray you did? If he purchased for himself a future through that betrayal? If you were told by a world full of men that that betrayal confirmed for them that they were right to see you as a monster, to be shunned? She is not mad. She is adrift, alone in the most terrifying way. What she will do next, I do not know. But I refuse to proclaim myself to be yet another one of her enemies by acting like I have something to fear from her.
Max, Missandei, Monica. Not really going to comment on that right now. Not really the place to be treading in this video. But I do want to talk about Monica. See, Monica's role in this show was important and kind of validating. Not only was it nice to see a black woman superhero do all the good superhero stuff, Monica was also just a good, relatable character. And Tiona Paris effortlessly held her own against Elizabeth Olsen, who arguably was giving the performance of her career here. Monica is what Daenerys was missing. Monica was Wanda's friend above all else. Not so easily poisoned by the so-called establishment to believe the narrative that the sad woman is actually crazy and she must be eliminated. The moment that I realised that WandaVision might not be all that we had hoped in terms of multiverse madness was through Monica. It was how I knew I was going to make this video. And, well, the fact that the voice of reasons in this situation essentially are people of colour, through Monica and Jimmy, and a lady doctor constantly referred to as Miss, feels pretty deliberate to me on behalf of the writers, if you know what I mean. And this is entirely irrelevant to my point, but I do think my favourite moment in the entire show was when Monica got her powers. It's up there with Wanda storming out of the Hex with the drone. Anyway. Monica and her fellow Greek chorus members, Jimmy and Darcy, can see the situation for what it is. They are watching it on TV. This is purposely meta. They are both characters in Wanda's story and audience members too. Monica is not only the voice of reason and kindness, but also the inherent voice of the audience. An audience that is rooting for Wanda. This great and all-powerful woman, to not allow men to turn her into a monster. To take control of her own narrative and not succumb to essentially becoming a weapon for men that thrive and survive off of war and violence. Men like Hayward who take a mother's love or a widow's grief and turn it into something worth of damnation, as if women's emotions are weapons to be wielded against women themselves. Perhaps men like Brian, Dany is Hitler's daughter Cogman, or David, children of rape, are monsters Benioff. When Wanda, like Dany, is baited by these kinds of men to turn her grief into power, and that power into control over the type of people she has dedicated her life to saving, Monica knows that this isn't her. She steps closer to Wanda, whereas everyone in Game of Thrones abandons Dany at every turn. Monica is empathy embodied, caring for Wanda when Wanda rejects her, and when Wanda isn't caring about herself. And Monica still manages to do this while being in control of her own personal narrative and whilst confronting Wanda when she needs to. Like Monica and Hayward's conversations about whether or not Wanda was just sad or whether she was actually a terrorist seem very reminiscent to me of literal conversations I have had with people back in the day online about Dany. No over-exaggeration on my behalf either, as you can see. Here is a post literally describing Daenerys as the fictional equivalent of ISIL. Monica's line to Wanda about "do not let him make you the villain" feels super responsive to me. It's meta, almost as if the writers were responding to the zeitgeist around how the great and powerful Oz-inspired goddess witches on screen are portrayed. I mean, this is arguably the first time Wanda has been treated properly in the MCU, and I do not need to have seen all the films to know that. Civil War basically had Vision locking her in a room because Tony thought she was too powerful, as if Tony Stark himself doesn't need to be tried at The Hague. And maybe the writers were actually responding to these stories. Perhaps, if I may theorise for a moment, Matt Shakman over here, who created the show, maybe was using it to specifically say something about Dany or people like her. He did direct 2 episodes of Game of Thrones, and those 2 episodes are arguably the last time that Daenerys had any real agency in her own story, back in season 7 of the show. Like, season 7 was a bad season, and meeting Jon Snow was the worst thing to ever happen to my girl here, but season 7 was still better than the unspeakable evil that was season 8 of Game of Thrones. Female characters are never really given the benefit of the doubt, but this show gave it to Wanda. It gave her space to feel all of her feelings and heal from them. If this was Game of Thrones, Wanda would have sacrificed Billy and Tommy at the stake, and Vision would have had to put her down like a dog, only to then be rewarded for his heroism and made like the head of sword or something. And this is not just a Game of Thrones issue. The space for women's healing after the pain is not a narrative often explored unless that grief is aesthetically marketable and quirky, or if it is worthy of condemnation. This show let Wanda be mother and monster, witch and widow, and I cannot overemphasize how damn rare that is to see on TV these days. They let Wanda embrace her full devil self costume, her Lightbringer crown, comparing this imagery to the images of Dany and her dragon wings in the last season of Thrones. You can see the difference, right? This beastly demon aesthetic is shown to be where a woman's powers lie. In Game of Thrones, it's shown to be where all of society's downfall lies. Wanda's demon children are presented with empathy, too. Again, we can't say the same for Dany's. Even in allowing Agatha to live, the writers are telling us that yes, she may be a dick, she may be a power-hungry narcissist, but she's also definitely a little bit correct when she says this.
Same story, different century. There will always be torches and pitchforks for ladies like us, Wanda.
Wanda knows it's the truth, and so do the writers, and that's exactly why she is allowed to live. All the women live, actually, this time. Wanda is a mother goddess, essentially, as is Dany too. This unknowingly powerful woman with the ability to create and take life with little effort, power unmatched within her world. And mother goddesses have always been made elemental of both beauty and love, as well as war and justice. An ancient and repeated trope, and one that personally kind of haunts me. I mean, my working title for my Dany manuscript is literally The Mythological Downfall of Daenerys Targaryen, and I spend half of it talking about Medusa. Some tales are quite literally as old as time itself. WandaVision felt different because Wanda's mythological pain was not her downfall, but the origin of her true self. Time was taken to acknowledge, as Emilia said, that there is only so much loss a person can take before it begins to destroy them. You have to acknowledge that trauma, to help people heal from it. Like Monica says, if Wanda's grief is the problem, then it can be the solution. Protecting and respecting these emotions is what saves the day in WandaVision, not the demonization of them. Because these shows may be fantasy, but they are written here in the real world by real people, and in reality, women's grief is more often than not a vessel for good. Like the solving of murders, or running for local government to represent local people, or literally dismantling a fascist party and having them all sent to prison. In reality, yes, a woman's grief can be powerful and destructive, but rarely is it as vicious as it is portrayed to be in fiction. I guess what I'm really saying, at the end of the day, is I'm kind of glad that a bunch of nerds who wanted Mephisto, myself included, ended up just having to deal with 9 episodes of catharsis. 9 episodes of the writers saying, this woman's feelings matter actually. Inherently, this shouldn't feel as brave as it was, but given the current climate on TV right now for crazy women, some of this felt genuinely bold.
Take me out. See, that's where you and Hayward differ. He's gonna burn Westview to the ground just to get what he wants. Don't let him make you the villain.
If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. I tend to overscript my videos sometimes and make them really long. Hopefully this one's a little shorter and a bit more spontaneous. If this is more up your alley, please let me know and I'll make more videos like this and save myself all the research time. If you got this far, please subscribe. I need the validation. And tell me what you thought about WandaVision because I genuinely cannot stop thinking about it. Mage out.